All right, so now that we're all set up and ready to go, we're going to get started designing the user interface of our app. Our app is going to have two images that are in a row horizontally next to each other. And as with every sort of Flutter app design, we're going to be using a lot of widgets to achieve this. By now, you're already pretty familiar with scaffolds and rows because we've already done it, and the design of this app should be quite familiar to you. We're going to start off, as with all of our apps, with a scaffold. And in this scaffold, we're going to have an app bar. But for the body of the scaffold, we're simply going to have a row with two images, each containing a picture of a dice image. Now that we've got an overview of what the user interface should look like, let's go ahead and build it inside Android Studio. Now notice that the app bar is already set out for you, so we don't need to touch that. And the body is simply a stateless widget, similar to ones that we've created before, which gives us this crucial build method, which will refresh itself every single time we hit save or when we click on the hot reload button. So it's going to make designing our app a lot easier. Currently, our body is a dice page, which only returns a container. So that means that there's actually absolutely nothing on screen so far, because the container is pretty much invisible. Let's go ahead and return a row instead. Now, our row is going to have two children, and the two children are going to be two image widgets. The image widget that we've been working with so far is something that looks like this. We create an image and we specify what kind of image we want to use. And in this case, of course, we want to use an asset image, pulling in the images from our images folder. Now, because we've already got everything linked up inside our config file, we'll be able to tap into any of the images inside this folder just by specifying the path to that image. So in this case, the asset name is going to be a string inside some single quotes, and then it's images/dice1.png. And as soon as I hit save, you'll see my dice show up on screen. But there's a bit of a problem here. Our dice image is actually too big to fit onto the screen. And we're seeing these yellow and black bars telling us that there's actually parts of the image that's gone off the screen. So as we know, the user interface of Flutter apps are painted onto the screen on both iOS and Android. So that means that if you tell the app to paint something that's really, really large, and it's going to go off the screen on one side or multiple sides of the screen, then you're going to end up with these hatched yellow and black bars. So how can we solve this problem? How can we get rid of these ugly yellow and black bars and make sure that all of the content we want to show on the screen actually fits on the screen? First things first, I'm going to remember to add my commas after every parentheses so that when I hit save, Dart will automatically reformat it for me and it looks far less confusing what's going on. So we know that we've got a row with a single child at the moment, which is just an image widget. And the image that's being displayed in that widget is an asset image and it comes from this file here. Now, this file, if you double click on it, is quite large. It's actually 500 by 500 pixels large. Now, when that gets rendered on screen, normally you only have a width of about 300, and that's why it's gone off the screen to the right. There's a couple of ways that we can sort this out. We can either change our image's width property, so we can say that the width of this image should only be 200 pixels. So now the image widget is only 200 pixels wide, and that means that our whole image can actually fit into the screen. But the problem with this is kind of hard-coded, right? Say if we had a much smaller phone, or say if the user turned their phone to landscape, then that kind of layout doesn't really look great. It's all the way bunched up to the left corner, and it's not taking up as much space as it could do, and it's really not making the most of the screen real estate. So what can we do about this? Well, one of the most useful widgets that we can use to sort out this problem is something called expanded. An expanded class has to be a child of a row or a column. And what it does is that it will expand to fill the available space in the main axis. So that means that for a row, it'll try to fill as much horizontal space as it has, and for a column, it'll try to be as tall as it can be. So that means any children that you put into this widget will also expand and contract depending on how much space is available. Let's test this out in real life. Let's delete that width property so that we're no longer hard coding how our layout looks, but let's make it adaptable by embedding our image widget inside an expanded widget. So I'm going to cut out my image widget. I'm going to put it down at the bottom, and instead of it, I'm going to add my expanded widget. And inside this widget, it can only have a single child, and that child is of course going to be our image widget that we got from earlier on. And I'm going to delete that extra comma, and now if I hit save, you'll notice that the expanded widget automatically resizes to fill the available horizontal space because we're inside a row. Now if I change that to a column, then you'll notice that it'll try to expand to fill the entire vertical space. But we want two dice side by side, so we're going to change this back to a row, and we're going to have our expanded widget making sure that our image doesn't go off the screen, but takes up as much space as it can on the screen. The other thing that you can do with an expanded widget is you can specify how much space it should take up compared to other expanded widgets. I'm going to go ahead and copy this expanded widget, and I'm going to paste it into my row. So I now have a row with two expanded widgets. And as soon as I hit save, you can see that both of them will try to take up as much space as it can on the horizontal axis. And because I have two expanded widgets, they only have half of the screen each, so that's how much they each get. But let's say that I wanted the one on the left to take up twice as much width as the one on the right. I can do that really easily by simply adding a property called flex to my expanded widget. So I can say that the one on the left, so at the beginning of the row, is going to have a flex of 2, and the one on the right is going to have a flex of 1. What this does is that it ensures that this expanded widget expands to take up twice the width that this one will do, but still maintaining that everything is inside the space that's available in the screen. So when I hit save, you'll see that this one becomes twice as wide, and this one becomes only half as wide as this one. So Flex is really flexible. You could say that. You could change the number to any ratio you want. So you could turn this into 12, and you can change this into 5 if you wanted a ratio of 12 to 5. And it means that you have a really adaptable way of switching up the sizes of all your widgets that you put onto screen. But in our case, we actually don't need the Flex widget because we want both of them to take up the same amount of space. And by default, every expanded widget gets its Flex setting set to 1. And of course, if they both have a flex of 1, then it looks exactly like this. They take up the same amount of space. So this is already included in the expanded widget. Now, how do I know this? Of course, it's the documentation. Documentation is our friend. And as developers, we might not have a lot of friends, but the documentation is definitely one of them. So if we scroll down, you'll notice that we have a lot of other properties that we can change. But the most commonly ones that you'll be using when you're using this expanded class is going to be the flex. And if you come from web development and you've used Bootstrap, then this will be a really natural concept to grasp. Now, if you've never done any web development, then don't worry, it's really, really simple. The flex property is just a ratio. And once you have a play around with it, you'll understand it with no problems. Now that I've got both of my dice images onto the screen as an image widget that has the image inside it set to an asset image, I want to show you a slightly shorter way of doing this. And the reason why I know this is because I went onto the widget catalog and I had a look at the asset images and icon widgets, and I selected the image widget that we're using. And it says here that there's several convenient constructors to create an image. And we've been using simply a bog standard image and then specifying the image property for it using this image provider thing, which can be an asset image or a network image. But actually, because you do this so often, the Flutter team actually gave you a very, very simple factory method, which is image.asset or image.network. So we can transform our code to make it a lot shorter by using this constructor instead. Let's go over to our Android Studio, and instead of writing out all of this image code, I can simply write image.asset and then specify the asset name, which is images.dice1.png. And that does exactly the same as this, but it looks a lot shorter because using asset images is so common, they've added in a convenient way of creating this image widget. So let's go ahead and transform this second image widget in the same way. And you can see now our code is a lot more concise. And that means there's less nesting and there's less potential issues that could crop up. When you hit save, nothing will change because it's still pulling in our image from our assets and it's still displaying it in a row. Now, in this lesson and in previous lessons, we've been moving widgets around by copying and pasting or cutting it out and moving it around. And that's quite error prone. So in the next lesson, I want to show you a really convenient way of embedding a widget inside another widget or deleting a widget if you need to. For all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.